Hey, everybody, and welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today we're going to be unpacking a case that's really perplexing, to say the least.
Definitely perplexing.
Yeah, it's the disappearance of Marian Fi from Washington, D.C. back in 2003.
Yeah.
Our source material for this deep dive is an episode of the true crime podcast, Anatomy of Murder.
Great podcast.
Yeah,
I love that one.
it's a good one. And this one is really a nail biter.
Yeah.
You see, Marian's body was never found, so this is what they call a nobody murder case.
Right.
And so right off the bat, we're kind of presented with this fascinating question, like, how do investigators build a case, let alone get a conviction, when there's no physical evidence of a victim?
Yeah, I mean, that's a question that's puzzled legal minds for centuries.
Yeah.
What's so interesting about these nobody cases is that they force investigators to rely on a different kind of evidence trail.
Right.
One that's built on, circumstantial evidence, witness testimony, and often the suspect's own missteps and contradictions.
Okay, so let's set the scene here. It's Thanksgiving 2003.
Right.
Marian Fi, a mother of five, vanishes from her D.C. home.
Right.
Almost immediately, her boyfriend, Harold Devine Austin, becomes the prime suspect. Now, you might be wondering what made investigators zero in on Devine so quickly.
Right. Well, the podcast highlights several red flags right from the start. For example, Marion's children reported hearing her say, "No, Divine, no," followed by a gunshot.
Oh, wow.
That's a chilling detail, right? And it immediately casts suspicion on Divine. Also, there's the matter of the blood-soaked mattress found in Marion's home.
Gosh.
So we have a potential crime scene, but no body.
A blood-soaked mattress, but no body. That must have been a frustrating starting point for investigators.
Very much so. Very much so.
It seems like that puts a lot of pressure on Devine to explain that away, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And as we'll see, Divine's attempts to explain away the mounting evidence against him only dug him a deeper hole. So instead of cooperating, he chose to weave a web of lies and manipulation, making the investigator's job even more difficult.
So tell me more about these lies. What kind of stories was Devine spinning to try and cover his tracks?
Well, he came up with a whole array of really outlandish explanations for Marion's disappearance. First, he claimed she'd gone to his grandmother's in North Carolina.
Okay.
Then he changed his story, saying she was on a crack binge in DuPont Circle.
Wow.
He even concocted this tale about her calling him from a payphone, which, as the podcast points out, is completely illogical.
Wait, calling from a payphone?
Yeah.
That just seems incredibly suspicious.
Very much so.
It's like he wasn't even trying to make his lies believable.
It's a great observation, and it really speaks to a pattern of behavior that investigators often see in these nobody cases. You know, the suspect feels this pressure to offer an explanation, but their lies often end up being more incriminating than silence would have been.
Yeah, it's like the old saying, oh, what a tangled web we weave when first we practice to deceive.
Exactly. And Divine's web of deception only got more tangled as the investigation progressed. Now, here's where things take a really bizarre turn. Just days after Marion's presumed murder, Divine gets into a car accident while driving her car.
Oh, wow.
And guess what?
What?
He starts a relationship with the woman who hit him.
Wait, he starts dating the woman who hit his car. Okay.
Talk about opportunism.
Yeah, I mean, I guess some people thrive in chaos, but
Yeah.
that's a whole other level. But it does also seem awfully convenient, like almost like he's trying to create this image of normalcy in the midst of a very abnormal situation.
Right, you're picking up on a crucial aspect of his behavior. You know, these actions suggest a very deliberate attempt to project an image of innocence. By starting this new relationship and acting as if everything is fine, he's trying to create a false narrative that Marian is still alive, and he's not a suspect, but a grieving boyfriend.
Right, it's like he's creating this smokescreen trying to distract from the real issue, Mary's disappearance. But did this new relationship play into his web of lies at all?
It certainly did. He actually involves this woman in an insurance fraud scheme.
Oh, gosh.
They find a neighborhood girl to impersonate Marian, stage a meeting with the insurance adjuster, and collect the payout for the car accident.
So he's not just lying to the police, he's actively engaging in criminal activity to cover his tracks.
Yes.
But wouldn't this insurance scam create a paper trail, some kind of record that could ultimately expose his lies?
Absolutely. And you know, it highlights another key element of nobody murder investigations.
Okay.
Often it's not just the initial crime that trips up the suspect, but the subsequent actions they take to cover it up. They might leave a digital trail, make inconsistent statements, or involve unwitting accomplices. all of which can be used against them in court.
It's like the cover-up becomes its own crime scene, full of clues and contradictions. But I'm still stuck on the fact that he was brazen enough to involve someone new in this scheme. Did investigators ever suspect this new girlfriend was involved in Marian's disappearance?
Yeah, initially there were suspicions, but the focus really remained on Devine. Remember, they had those chilling accounts from the children, and the blood evidence pointed toward some kind of violent confrontation. But it's important to note that in nobody cases, investigators often have to cast a wide net.
Right.
They can't afford to rule anyone out until they have a clearer picture of what happened.
So they're looking at Devine, they're considering this new girlfriend, and all the while, they still have no body, no clear indication of what happened to Marian. This must have been incredibly frustrating for the investigator.
Incredibly, yeah.
But it sounds like the investigation's about to take another unexpected turn.
You're right about that. While in jail for an unrelated armed robbery, Devine starts bragging about killing a woman. Enter the jailhouse informant, who claims to have heard Devine's confession.
Hold on, a jailhouse informant? Those are notoriously unreliable, right?
Yeah.
They often have their own motives for coming forward.
Yeah.
So how did the investigators handle this new information?
Well, they approached it with a healthy dose of skepticism, which is crucial in any investigation, but especially in nobody cases where the stakes are so high. They knew they couldn't just take the informant's word at face value.
So how did they try to verify the information? Did they find any evidence to support the informant's claims?
Right, so they started by scrutinizing the details of this alleged confession.
Okay.
And right away, inconsistencies emerged. For instance, Devine told this wild story about dumping the body in Baltimore Lake, a place that doesn't even exist.
What?
It seemed like he was intentionally throwing in these outlandish details to try and discredit the informant's testimony.
Baltimore Lake, that's ridiculous. It's almost like he wanted to get caught in the lie.
Right.
But it also shows a level of arrogance, doesn't it? Like,
Yeah.
he thought he was smarter than the investigators, that he could manipulate the system.
Precisely. And that arrogance would ultimately be his downfall. Now, here's where investigators got really clever. They decided to use this informant to their advantage. They set up a meeting between Devine and a supposed lawyer who was actually an undercover detective.
Ooh.
They wanted to see if Devine would slip up and reveal more details about the crime.
Oh, that's a classic undercover operation.
Yeah.
It's like something out of a movie.
Yeah.
But what did Devine say? Did he fall for the trap?
He did, to some extent. He spun this new tale implicating another man named Daryl, claiming that this Daryl was the real killer.
Oh, wow.
But like his other stories, this one quickly fell apart under scrutiny.
So he's still trying to deflect blame, even when confronted with a lawyer who seems to be on his side.
Right.
It's like he can't help but lie, even when it's clearly not in his best interest. But this whole scenario with the informant raises a question. Did investigators ever consider the possibility that the informant might be working for Devine?
That's an excellent question, and it's something that investigators always have to be mindful of.
Yeah.
Jailhouse informants can be valuable sources of information, but they can also be manipulated by, savvy criminals.
Yeah.
And in this case, turns out that's exactly what happened.
Wait, are you saying the jailhouse informant was actually working for Devine?
That's right.
The whole thing was a setup.
The big reveal was that the informant had been put up to it by Devine.
Oh, my God.
It was a pre-planned attempt to mislead the investigation, a risky gamble that ultimately backfired.
Wow, talk about a plot twist. It's like Devine was playing three-dimensional chess while the investigators were playing checkers. But I have to ask, if Devine was going to all this trouble to fabricate a confession, why not just keep quiet?
Right.
Wouldn't that have been a safer strategy?
It might seem counterintuitive, but this type of behavior is not uncommon in nobody murder cases. Some suspects feel this compulsion to control the narrative, to inject themselves into the investigation. They might think they can outsmart the police, or they might just be driven by, a narcissistic need to be the center of attention.
It's almost like they can't resist the temptation to play games even when the stakes are so high.
Right.
But this whole scheme with the informant must have been incredibly frustrating for the investigators. It's like they were constantly hitting dead ends, chasing shadows instead of concrete evidence.
Absolutely.
So what was their next move? How did they get Devine to finally crack?
They decided to confront him directly, laying out the evidence they'd gathered, including those incriminating phone calls to his ex-girlfriend. Remember, Devine had previously requested to see the arrest warrant, which detailed the evidence against him.
Ah, so they used his own curiosity against him.
Exactly, yeah.
That's clever. But did he finally confess?
He did, but not before trying to manipulate the situation one last time.
Okay, I'm on the edge of my seat. Tell me everything.
Okay, so investigators bring Devine in for questioning and remind him of his request to see the warrant. You know, they knew he'd been studying the evidence against him.
Right.
They wanted to see how he'd react.
That's a classic interrogation tactic, right?
Yeah.
Put the pressure on, see how the suspect responds. But I imagine it's even more intense in a nobody case where there's this added layer of uncertainty hanging over everything.
Absolutely, and in this case, the tension was palpable.
Yeah.
They even played a recording of one of Devine's phone calls where he confessed to his ex-girlfriend.
Whoa! They play the actual recording.
Yeah.
That must have been a bombshell moment.
It was, and you can hear it in Devine's voice. You
Yeah.
know, he goes from this confident and defiant to hesitant and uncertain. You can almost feel the walls closing in on him.
So did he break down? Did he finally admit to killing Marian?
He did confess, but with a catch. He admitted to causing Marian's death, but he claimed it was an accident. He said that she grabbed the gun and it went off during a struggle.
An accident? Come on. With all the evidence pointing towards a violent confrontation, a blood-soaked mattress, those chilling accounts from the children, that's a tough pill to swallow.
Yeah, you're absolutely right to be skeptical. The investigators were too. But remember, even a partial confession can be a major breakthrough in a nobody case.
Right.
It's an admission of guilt, even if the suspect is trying to, downplay their role in the crime.
Yeah, it's like he's trying to have his cake and eat it too.
Yeah.
Admitting to being involved, but trying to minimize his culpability.
Yeah.
But did he reveal what he did with Marian's body? I mean, that's the million-dollar question, right?
He did, and his answer shocked even the seasoned investigators. He claimed he put Marian's body in trash bags and dumped it in the dumpster behind Ben's Chili Bowl, that famous D.C. landmark.
Ben's Chili Bowl. Are you serious? That place is always packed. It's a D.C. institution. There's no way he could have disposed of a body there without someone noticing.
That was everyone's initial reaction, but remember, this was 2003, and waste disposal wasn't as closely monitored as it is today.
Yeah.
Plus, Ben's Chili Bowl generates a lot of trash, and their dumpsters are emptied frequently.
Okay, so it's not impossible,
Yeah.
but it still seems incredibly risky. I mean, someone must have seen something, right?
That's what investigators hoped. But they knew that finding evidence after all this time would be like finding a needle in a haystack.
So what happened next? Did they search the dumpster? Did they try to track down the trash route?
They did launch a massive search, but it wasn't as simple as just checking the dumpster behind Ben's Chili Bowl.
Right.
Remember, this was 2 years after Marian's disappearance.
Oh, wow.
The trash from that dumpster would have been transported to a landfill, mixed with tons of other waste.
Oh, wow. So they had to search an entire landfill.
Yes.
That must have been a logistical nightmare.
It was a daunting task, and they knew the odds of finding Marian's remains were slim, but they felt they owed it to her family, to the community, to try.
Wow, talk about dedication.
Yeah.
So what happened? Did they ever find Marian's body?
Sadly, no. The landfill search came up empty. Despite their best efforts, Marian's remains were never found.
That's heartbreaking. All that effort, and still no closure for Marian's family. It makes you wonder, how do you even begin to process that kind of loss? Knowing that your loved one is gone, but their body is still out there somewhere.
Right. It's a question that haunts many families who are victims of nobody murders. You
Yeah.
know, that lack of closure can be incredibly painful, but it also makes the pursuit of justice even more crucial.
Right.
Even without a body, investigators and prosecutors can still hold perpetrators accountable.
Right.
And that's what happened in Marian Fi's case.
Okay, so even though they never found Marian's body, they still had enough evidence to convict Devine.
Right.
But how is that even possible? I mean, you'd think a body would be essential for a murder conviction.
Yeah, you're right. Traditionally, a body was considered crucial for a murder conviction, but Marian Fi's case would become a landmark case, proving that it was possible to secure a conviction even when the victim's remains are missing.
Wow.
And it all came down to the strength of the circumstantial evidence, the compelling witness testimony, and the sheer tenacity of the investigators and prosecutors who refused to let this case go cold.
So this wasn't just a tragic story of a missing woman. It was a turning point in the way nobody murders were viewed and prosecuted.
Right.
I'm guessing this is where Tad Tobias, the prosecutor in this case, comes in.
Yes.
He went on to become a leading expert on nobody murders, right?
You're exactly right. This case lit a fire in Tad Tobias, and he dedicated his career to ensuring that other families in similar situations would have a fighting chance at justice.
Wow, what a story.
Yeah.
But we've only scratched the surface here. We need to delve deeper into the trial. the evidence that led to Divine's conviction, and the lasting impact that this case had on the criminal justice system. That's all coming up in part 2 of our deep dive, so stay tuned.
Yeah, stay tuned.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the disappearance of Marian Fi. So last time we left off with Divine Austin's sort of a confession. He admitted to causing Marian's death, but claimed it was an accident.
Right.
But with no body in Divine's history of deception, the prosecution definitely had their work cut out for them.
Oh, absolutely. Even with the confession, nobody murder trials present, very unique challenges.
Right.
Prosecutors have to build a rock-solid case based on circumstantial evidence, expert testimony, and a deep understanding of the psychology of deception.
So let's talk about the trial. What were some of the key pieces of evidence that the prosecution presented? I mean, besides Divine's rather dubious confession and those incriminating phone calls to his ex-girlfriend.
Well, one crucial piece of evidence was the complete lack of any activity on Marian's financial accounts after her disappearance.
Okay.
She received regular disability payments, but there were no withdrawals after November 2003. The prosecution argued this is a clear indication that she hadn't simply run away or disappeared voluntarily.
That makes sense. I mean, if she were alive and trying to stay hidden, wouldn't she need money to survive?
Exactly. And this financial evidence, combined with the fact that she left behind all of her personal belongings, her purse, her keys, her identification, it painted a picture of a woman who was abruptly taken from her life, not someone who chose to leave.
It's like the prosecution was building this narrative of a sudden and forced disappearance, contrasting it with Divine's claims that she had just simply walked away. But I'm guessing they needed more than just financial records to convince the jury.
They did, and that's where the testimony of Marian's children became so crucial.
Right.
They provided firsthand accounts of the events leading up to Marian's disappearance, including the argument they overheard and the gunshot that followed.
Right, you mentioned that before. It must have been incredibly difficult for those children to testify about such a traumatic experience. Did their testimony hold up under cross-examination?
Well, the defense did try to challenge their accounts, suggesting that the children might have misheard or misinterpreted what happened. But their testimony was consistent and detailed, and they remained steadfast, even under really intense questioning.
Wow, that takes a lot of courage, especially for young children.
Absolutely.
Their testimony must have been incredibly impactful for the jury.
Incredibly impactful. It really provided a human element to the case. You know, a glimpse into the fear and chaos that Marian's children experienced that night. And it helped to solidify the prosecution's narrative that Divine was not only responsible for Marian's death, but that he had created a dangerous and volatile environment for her and her children.
It sounds like the prosecution was doing a good job of weaving together a compelling story, using the evidence and testimony to create a really clear picture of what happened. But was there anything else besides the financial records and the children's accounts that really solidified their case?
There was one more element that proved to be crucial. The lack of any digital footprint from Marian after her disappearance.
Okay.
Remember, this was 2003, before smartphones and social media were as prevalent as they are today.
Right, so it was much easier to just disappear without leaving a trace electronically.
Exactly, and the prosecution used that to their advantage.
Okay, but how did they use that to their advantage?
They argued that if Marian were alive, there would have been some sign of her online activity. No emails, no bank transactions, no phone calls, nothing. Her complete absence from the digital world really reinforced the idea that she had not simply chosen to disappear, but that she had met with foul play.
That's an interesting point. It's like they were saying, if she were alive, we would have seen some digital breadcrumbs, some indication that she was still out there.
Exactly. And this argument resonated with the jury, especially given the context of the time. You know, back in 2003, it was much more difficult to vanish without leaving some sort of electronic trail. Today, with the proliferation of smartphones and social media, it's almost impossible to completely disappear from the digital world.
Yeah, it makes you wonder how differently this case might have unfolded if it had happened in today's hyper-connected world.
Absolutely.
But back to the trial. We've talked about the financial evidence, the children's testimony, and the lack of a digital footprint for Marian. Was there anything else that stood out to you about the trial proceedings?
Yeah, one aspect that I found particularly fascinating was the prosecution's use of expert testimony to explain the psychology of deception. They brought in a forensic psychologist who specialized in criminal behavior.
Right.
And this expert testified about the common patterns of lying and manipulation that investigators often see in nobody murder cases.
So they were basically trying to educate the jury about the telltale signs of a liar. I imagine that would be helpful, especially in a case where the suspect, Devine, had a history of deception.
You're right. The expert's testimony helped the jury understand the significance of Devine's constantly shifting stories, his elaborate schemes, and his attempts to control the narrative. It provided a framework for interpreting his behavior and seeing through his lies.
That's so interesting. I never realized that expert testimony on deception could play such a crucial role in a murder trial.
It's critical, especially in nobody cases.
Yeah, especially in a nobody case where the prosecution really has to rely on a different kind of evidence trail.
Exactly. And in this case, the expert's testimony helped to connect the dots, weaving together the circumstantial evidence, the witness accounts, and Devine's own behavior into this cohesive narrative that pointed toward his guilt.
It sounds like the prosecution was building a very strong case. But what about the defense? How did they try to counter the prosecution's arguments? I mean, did they present any alternative theories about what might have happened to Marian?
The defense did try to poke holes in the prosecution's case, highlighting inconsistencies in the witness testimony and suggesting that the lack of a body meant there was no definitive proof of murder.
Okay.
They argued that Marian could have simply run away, she might have been the victim of an accident, or that someone else entirely could have been responsible for her disappearance.
So they were basically trying to create reasonable doubt, suggesting that there were other plausible explanations for Marian's disappearance. But did they present any evidence to support these alternative theories? Or were they relying solely on the lack of a body to cast doubt on the prosecution's case?
They primarily relied on the lack of a body and the inherent challenges of proving a murder without physical evidence of a victim.
Right.
They also tried to discredit the prosecution's witnesses, suggesting that their memories might be faulty or that they might have been influenced by the intense media coverage surrounding the case.
It's like they were saying, yes, there are suspicious circumstances, but without a body, you can't convict our client of murder. But did this strategy work? Were the jury swayed by the defense's arguments?
Not really. The prosecution had done such a masterful job of presenting a cohesive and compelling case, and the lack of a body, while a significant challenge, didn't ultimately derail their efforts. Remember, they had those incriminating phone calls where Devine confessed to his ex-girlfriend, they had the children's chilling accounts of the night Marian disappeared, and they had the expert testimony that shed light on Devine's deceptive behavior.
Right, so even though they didn't have a body, they had a mountain of circumstantial evidence that pointed directly at Devine.
Absolutely.
But there's one piece of the puzzle we haven't talked about yet. Devine's ex-girlfriend, the one he confessed to over the phone. What role did her testimony play in the trial? I remember you mentioned that she went sightseeing instead of showing up to testify. Did she ever end up taking the stand?
She did, but not without causing a major delay in the trial. Her decision to go sightseeing instead of fulfilling her legal obligation as a witness, that was just a bizarre twist that added another layer of drama to an already captivating case. But when she finally did take the stand, her testimony proved to be incredibly powerful.
Oh, I can only imagine. She was the one person who could corroborate Devine's confession, the one person who had heard him admit to causing Marian's death. But what was it about her testimony that made it so impactful? Was it simply the fact that she confirmed his confession, or was there something more to it?
Well, it was a combination of factors. First, she provided a very detailed account of her relationship with Devine, establishing a context for his confession.
Okay.
She testified about his controlling behavior, his volatile temper, and his tendency to lie and manipulate. This helps the jury understand his character and his capacity for violence.
So she wasn't just confirming his confession, she was providing insights into his personality, painting a picture of a man who was capable of committing such a horrific act. But did she provide any specific details about the crime itself? Or was her testimony focused primarily on Devine's character and their relationship?
She did provide specific details that corroborated key elements of the prosecution's case. She testified about a phone call she received from Devine shortly after Marian's disappearance. He was frantic and distraught, and he admitted to her that he had done something terrible.
Whoa, that's huge. He basically confessed to her right after the crime. But did he provide any specifics about what he had done, or did he keep it vague?
He was initially vague, but as the conversation continued, he revealed more details, including the fact that he had used a gun and that he had disposed of Marian's body. He even mentioned the location where he had dumped her remains, a detail that aligned with what he had later told the investigators.
So her testimony not only confirmed his confession, but also provided crucial details that corroborated other evidence in the case. It's like she was the missing link, the piece that tied everything together. But I'm curious, how did she come across to the jury? I mean, she had gone sightseeing instead of testifying. Did that affect her credibility?
That's a great question. Her initial decision to skip out on her court appearance certainly raised eyebrows and could have damaged her credibility. But when she did take the stand, she came across as sincere, remorseful, and genuinely fearful of Divine.
So the jury believed her. They didn't think she was lying or trying to protect Divine.
It seems that they did believe her. Her testimony was detailed, consistent with other evidence, and she withstood a rigorous cross-examination by the defense. And her willingness to testify against someone she had once been close to, someone she clearly still feared, that lent an air of authenticity to her account.
Wow, that must have been a turning point in the trial. I mean, to have his own ex-girlfriend, someone who knew him intimately, testify against him like that must have been devastating for the defense.
It was a major blow to the defense's case. They had tried to discredit other witnesses to cast doubt on the circumstantial evidence, but they couldn't easily dismiss the testimony of someone who had been so close to Divine, someone who had heard him confess with her own ears.
It sounds like the prosecution had built an airtight case.
They did.
But I'm still wondering, without a body, without that definitive physical evidence, how did the jury reach a guilty verdict? What was it about the prosecution's case that ultimately convinced them?
It was the cumulative effect of the evidence, the way it all fit together to create a clear and compelling narrative. The financial records, the lack of a digital footprint, the children's testimony, the expert testimony on deception, and the ex-girlfriend's powerful account, it all pointed towards Divine's guilt.
So it wasn't just one smoking gun. It was a whole arsenal of evidence that, when combined, proved beyond a reasonable doubt that Divine was responsible for Marian's death. It's like they were piecing together a puzzle, and each piece of evidence, each witness account, brought them closer to the complete picture.
That's a great analogy. And in this case, the puzzle was complete enough to secure a conviction. The jury found Divine Austin guilty of second-degree murder, and he was sentenced to 42 years in prison.
42 years. That's a significant sentence, especially for a nobody murder case. It speaks volumes about the strength of the prosecution's case and the jury's belief in Divine's guilt. But I imagine it was a bittersweet victory for Marian's family.
Definitely.
I mean, they got justice, but they still don't have closure. They still don't know what happened to her body where she is now.
You're right. And that lack of closure is a haunting reality for many families who are victims of nobody murders.
Yeah.
But Marian Fi's case did more than just bring her killer to justice. It became a landmark case, paving the way for more nobody prosecutions and inspiring a movement within the criminal justice system to better understand and address the complexities of these cases.
And that's where Tad Tobias's work comes in, right?
Yeah.
He didn't just prosecute this case. He went on to become a leading expert in nobody murders, sharing his knowledge and experience to help other investigators and prosecutors navigate these really challenging cases.
Exactly. And that's what we'll be exploring in part 3 of our deep dive. We'll delve into Tad Debius's groundbreaking work, the creation of his nobody murder database, and the lasting legacy of Marian Fi's case. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been unpacking this captivating case, the case of Marian Fi, a nobody murder that really shook Washington, D.C. and had effects far beyond the courtroom. Divine Austin, Marian's killer, is behind bars, but that's not where the story ends. This is actually where the work of prosecutor Tad Debius takes center stage.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Debius didn't just secure a conviction in this really difficult case. He saw Marian's case as a call to action.
Yeah.
He recognized that nobody murders were often overlooked, misunderstood, and incredibly difficult to prosecute.
So he didn't just move on to the next case. What did he do to change things?
He became kind of obsessed in the best way possible with improving how the justice system handled these cases. You see, back then, there wasn't a lot of guidance for investigators or prosecutors, facing a nobody scenario.
Right.
Tobias decided to change that.
Wow.
It's one thing to win a case, but it's a whole other thing to try and change the system itself.
Right, but how do you even begin to tackle something so complex? These cases are like trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing.
Tobias started by doing something seemingly simple but incredibly impactful. He started compiling a database
Okay.
of nobody murder cases from across the country. He scoured news archives, court records, anything he could get his hands on.
Well,
And he did this mostly anonymously, calling himself the nobody guy.
wait, anonymously? Why all the secrecy?
It seems like he just wanted to avoid any kind of bureaucratic red tape or interference that might have slowed him down.
Hmm.
He was very laser focused on building this resource and making it as comprehensive as possible. He knew that data was key to understanding the patterns, the challenges and the potential solutions in nobody cases.
So it's like he was conducting his own independent investigation into the world of nobody murders.
Yeah.
But what kind of information was he gathering? What was he hoping to learn from this database?
Oh, he collected details on everything from, victim demographics and suspect profiles to investigative techniques and trial outcomes.
Wow.
He was looking for trends, for common threads that might help investigators and prosecutors build stronger cases.
So he was basically creating a blueprint for tackling these cases,
Yeah.
a roadmap for navigating the legal and investigative minefield of nobody murders.
Exactly.
It's like he was turning his personal experience into a tool that could benefit others in the field.
Absolutely. That's exactly what he was doing. He believed that by sharing his knowledge and the insights gleaned from his database, he could help bring justice to more victims and their families.
Right.
And his efforts didn't stop with the database.
So what else did he do?
Right.
I'm guessing he didn't just create this massive database and then file it away in a drawer somewhere.
No, not at all. He started giving lectures, teaching classes, and consulting on, nobody murder cases across the country.
Wow.
He became the sought-after expert, sharing his expertise with law enforcement agencies and legal professionals.
So Marian Fi's case was like a catalyst. It sparked a movement within the criminal justice system to take these nobody murders more seriously. And Tobias was really leading the charge, using his experience and his passion to educate others and make a real difference.
He was a true advocate for justice, driven by a deep belief that every victim, regardless of whether their body is ever found, deserves to have their story told and their killer held accountable.
That's right. It's an incredible legacy for Marian Fi's case. It started as this tragic mystery, but it ultimately led to these groundbreaking changes in how nobody murders are investigated and prosecuted. It makes you realize that even in the darkest of circumstances, there can be this ripple effect of positive change.
Marian Fi's case and Tad Tobias's tireless work serve as this really powerful reminder that even in the absence of a body, justice can prevail.
Absolutely. This has been a really fascinating deep dive filled with twists, turns, and ultimately a glimmer of hope. It's a real testament to the power of human resilience, the pursuit of justice, and that unwavering belief that even the most complex cases can be solved.
That's right.
Well said. We hope you found this deep dive insightful and thought-provoking, and we'll see you next time.